Hey, welcome to Kyle Meredith With. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'm the guy in the title. It's an ongoing interview series presented by 91.9 WFPK, Independent Louisville, and Consequence of Sound. Today, I'm going to be talking with Dan Wilson of the band Semisonic. Their 1998 sophomore album, Feeling Strangely Fine, turning 20 years old this month. So I'm going to get the whole story, the backstory on the record that the record label said had no singles to it, which of course spurred Closing Time, Secret Smile, Singing in My Sleep. Dan Wilson's also responsible for writing some of the biggest hits for Adele and Taylor Swift and the Dixie Chicks and Halsey, and we're going to get into that as well. Dan Wilson of Semisonic.
Hi, Kyle. How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Are you ready to head back to 1998 again?
I am ready to head back to 1998 whenever it seems necessary to do so.
I imagine that you have to sort of probably head back to that year every so often anyway.
You know, it's interesting because my last album, Recovered, was a collection of recuttings by me of songs that I've written for other people, and we talked about, and it was like a broader trip through various times in the past, and it was a little bit disorienting. And sometimes thinking about Closing Time or Feeling Strangely Fine or Secret Smile or Semisonic is a little bit disorienting because it was such an intense 7 or 8 years of our lives, and it still looms large. And as you can guess, I hear songs from that album like at Home Depot, on the speakers and things like that. So it's kind of weird.
I mean, you were a band, as long as the Beatles, right? That was...
Yeah, so what was their problem?
What was their problem? Question we've been asking for 50 years now.
For years, yeah, exactly.
But, seriously, this record, it's still played in Home Depot and everything because this record exceeds its own genre. Looking back on it, pop rock was in a great spot in 1998.
Right.
There was so many great releases around there, and it was, we all know what sort of happened after that with radio and
right.
popular rock music, which was a very bad moment in the history of rock. But
I think what happened after Nirvana was, at least in rock music, it started to get pretty forgettable really quickly. Compared to that several years during that stretch, then things got, I think, maybe formulaic and started to get kind of forgettable. But we came along at a really good time. I feel. Yeah. I'm very lucky.
And then but I'll say even beyond, that moment in that genre, like this record holds up so well. I've spent all morning once again listening to it. I've probably heard the record 1,000 times over 20 years. It's definitely in my all-time favorite albums of all time. It's just one of those things.
Wow.
And
what's really interesting about it? I really have to discount my opinions about it, but at least I have a little more objectivity. At the time, there were a bunch of things about Semisonic that made us a little bit like outliers, even though we were, obviously, we did fine. But, my singing didn't have that kind of ultra-masculine kind of goat boy quality that a lot of the bands had. And at times people were kind of annoyed because in a way, I think I sang in a plainer way, like just a Midwestern dude talking sometimes. Mm-hmm. But I think in a way that makes the record less dated because it still kind of sounds like a guy, singing in a band, obviously, but also talking with his, kind of Midwestern accent. And that, I think, kind of helped us not, the record not be dated. And I have to say, Bob Clearmountain's mix of the record is really kind of natural band in a room times 1,000,
right.
kind of sound. So it doesn't have the kind of ouchy, gimmicky tones even that a lot of the singles had at that time. You
don't suffer from what so many artists suffer from, especially not just the 90s, but like the 80s when you would have that, super compressed drum or whatever, on top of it. And yeah.
Oh, those poor people. Yeah, I feel so bad. I feel so bad for some of the artists whose tracks, perfectly good songs from the 80s, but that just sound so dismal. I mean, like, some of the greatest songwriting, like there's a few songs by Tears for Fears that have the most amazing songwriting.
Right.
The 80s, but the sounds are so kind of gimmicky, sounding. It's rough because you want to be doing what's fresh and new, but sometimes that leads,
Yeah. And how are you to know at the time? How are you to know right then that that's happening? But
no, exactly. At the time, you're just going with your sort of enthusiasm and your excitement and what sounds cool, and there's nothing. None of us can guess what's going to be lasting. I have to say one third thing, if I could say, like, I'll toot my own horn a little bit. When I was working on the songs for Feeling Strangely Fine, I was thinking a lot about Simon and Garfunkel and Carole King and the Beatles and stuff that had come quite a bit before, but that I thought of as like really classic. And I was telling my record label that, and they were really bummed because that seemed to them like a formula for irrelevance. Like Simon and Garfunkel, are you insane? But I really wanted to get those songwriting, that's like those bones, into the songs. I really wanted to at least have the DNA of that kind of greatness from, even from Carole King's, New York period.
Yeah. Well done. You did it. And then to turn around, because you turned this in, and as I remember from the story, the record company said it didn't have any singles, right? Is that part of the story?
No, that's right. They said, yes, that's correct. No, they thought there were no singles, and told us to go back to the drawing board.
Oh, geez.
And yeah, and I was, it's funny because they did it in a way that was, they did it in a clever way because at the time I was so into making records. I was so into recording. I still am. But at the time I was so motivated by just studio time, and it was expensive, and it was a luxury and a treat to be able to go into a studio and record. And the way they presented it was, we don't think there are any singles, Dan, and we'd be happy to send you back in the studio for, a bunch more weeks and make some more tracks. And I was like, whoa, man, that sounds great. I'd love that, And then my manager, Jim, had to kind of like shake me and say, wait, do you think there are hits on this record? And I said, yeah, of course there are hits on this record. Is it like Closing Time and Secret Smile and Singing in My Sleep? And he goes, well, if you go back and make a bunch more tracks, which tracks do you think the record company will choose for singles? Will they choose the ones that were already there that they said were not singles, or will they choose the new ones? And I said, well, I guess they'll choose the new ones. And then my manager said, okay, well, go back into the studio and make more songs if you can guarantee that the next 4 things you write and record are better than Closing Time, Secret Smile, Singing in My Sleep. And I said, are you crazy? I can't guarantee that I'm going to do better than that. And he goes, okay, well, just don't answer your phone for like a month. And finally the label, they called and tried to get my attention and to convince me, and I ignored everybody for a month. And then they finally said, okay, we'll put it out. It's your funeral.
That was a good funeral.
People that you never know. Yeah, exactly. It turned out fine, but you really never know. And you can't blame people for not being able to spot a hit in advance, Yeah,
that's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, and that story, you're not the only one, obviously, that's happened to. There's some pretty famous moments of like that through history, but still, just now that we can look back, now that we have the luxury of hindsight, to be able to look back on that, it's just mind-blowingly amazing.
Yeah, and also they once the decision was made to put Feeling Strangely Fine out, even though the label thought there were no singles, they got behind it and they did their best, and it turned out great. So I don't even have hard feelings about it because it's not like they just buried us.
Right. No.
MCA really put forth a huge effort, and I still am friends with a bunch of people from the label. They rose to the occasion amazingly.
Yeah, I will say, I wonder if there was a bit of projecting or hopefulness on your part when I look at this will be my year. That song is included on there. It's like, okay, that first record. You guys got some nice acclaim off that, probably some college play and, some critical acclaim.
Right.
It didn't take you all the way there. Putting a song like This Will Be My Year on the record now seems to me like, okay, this is it. This is going to do it.
It's funny because that song was written by the drummer in the band, Jake Slichter. And he had a way of writing every 2 years. He would write something that would just sum up some aspect of where we were at. He would write a song. He didn't write a lot of songs, but every couple of years he would write a song that just said it all about where the band was at or where we were at with our circle of friends. And This Will Be My Year was totally captured our kind of, hopefulness, overconfidence. But the song has a kind of there's an ironic edge to it because it's in the end you don't feel like ultra confident about the guy singing the song. You're just like, yes, please, I want you to win also. So it's I love that song and what it says, and it really was kind of an anthem for us in a fun way.
Yeah. Now, was Closing Time an instant success out of the gate? I don't remember the trajectory there.
Yeah, Closing Time. Once they decided to put it out as a single, things moved very quickly. I can't remember. There were a couple of stations around the country that had, played our songs from Great Divide, the album before. And then when Closing Time came out, there was definitely a predisposition to try it. And it had this funny history. The whole thing of like researching listeners was, I'm sure it's still just as important as it's always been. But at the time when they tried to research whether anybody recognized Closing Time, they used the chorus, "I Know Who I Want to Take Me Home." And the research came back so bad, and they were so disappointed and sad. And then our camp said, no, research the verse. That's the one that has the title in it. And then they researched the verse, and it was like a smash. And so then people started playing it. It's also weird and dorky in the end. But I think the song became a hit much faster than anybody in our camp expected. And we were suddenly in an incredible whirlwind.
Yeah.
It was cool.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, you guys, you don't really seem like the band that would be caught up in the excess of stardom or anything, but the success part of everything, like, what was that like? What was that like for you?
Well, the excess part, we had been on tour. John and I had been on tour with Trip Shakespeare for like 7 years before that. Mm-hmm. And then Semisonic was on tour for that, 3 years at that time or something, or 4. So we had already done, basically a mild version of excess. None of us ended up in hospitals or rehab or anything like that. And we had, gotten our yayas out to a degree, and none of us were in it for excess. We just really, really wanted to make tracks, Right. So we had already we were road, battle hardened on tour, and we were ready to do it. But what the excessive part turns out is just what you're expected to cram into your day becomes twice as much or 3 times as much as you're used to. And, it just was suddenly every day was a visit, in the morning, very early to a radio station and, performing on the air for people and then, Zooming, either flying or busing to the next venue, doing a lot of interviews, talking all day, doing a gig, meeting fans, trying to see the friends that in that town, staying up late, getting on the bus, waking up 5 hours later. It was just kind of, it was like having a super duper busy job all the time, every day, and getting 5 hours of sleep or less. And I don't know, I found it super fun. I liked it, and it was really tiring, but we were sort of up for it. We had all had the artistic doldrums parts of our lives already. Because when you're first starting out, no one wants to talk to you. So we had already done that. With nothing to do for weeks on end, we were all really ready to get to work.
I always like asking, with that success, though, it usually leads to at least 1 or 2 bizarre rock star moments, those surreal things that you catch. Do you have any, good stories of the time of that ilk?
Well, most of them were just like fan moments. When John and Jake and I were getting ready to play at the American Music Awards, we were in a hallway behind the stage, just a hallway, not a dressing room, nothing fancy, just fluorescent lights and tile floors. And we were standing, taking our places to eventually get up on the stage. And Whitney Houston was there with her 2 backup singers practicing something they were going to perform. And they were practicing their harmony, a very beautiful kind of gospel-y harmony thing they were going to do in this pop song that she was going to play. And it was unbelievably beautiful and exciting. And, of course, they were beautiful people. And we were just standing there, and it was almost like we were in, Valhalla with the gods or something. And then Stevie Wonder, he came by and listened and stood while they sang for a little while.
Man.
Just enjoying and smiling. And for Jacob, who was a Stevie fan from his childhood, and so was I, that added to this level of surrealism because we were such fanboys, and here are these people, unbelievable singers practicing, hard. It was an example to us. They were right up to the second they're going on stage, they were getting it exactly right and tightening it up. And then there's me and John and Jake and Stevie Stevie freaking Wonder, listening. That was surreal, man.
No, I bet.
Things like that.
I was trying to figure out which song I want to go with here. First off, though, getting back to the record, I think "Singing in My Sleep," because you mentioned that a few times, one of the greatest rock songs ever, to me, at least.
Oh, cool, man.
I don't know if you've seen your performance on the Late Show lately. I went back and found it on YouTube. You've got a really good hip swivel dance that you were doing a lot at the time.
Yes.
Is that your do you still do the hip swivel dance? Is that your move? Is that your move?
If the mood strikes me, if it feels good up there, it's somehow like I used to sing and kind of dance a little bit while I sang. And if you're singing the whole time, you're basically the top of your body, your head has to stay in the same place, if you're not holding the mic. And so all the dances kind of radiate down from the neck, so the swiveling hips just come from not really being able to move the head around too much, I guess. But I was never much of a dancer. That's probably good that I was tethered to the microphone.
I think Father John Misty learned your moves. I think he's stolen that one. I've seen him pull that one a few times. So.
Hey, I'd be happy to be as charming as he is on stage. I think he's really fascinating.
Very charming man. That is true.
Yeah.
And we'll hit the third single while we're here, too, because Secret Smile, I want to say that intro just paints the entire picture of everything to come. Like everything you'd want out of an intro of a song. Tell me about that one, if there's a good story.
Well, Secret Smile was an amazing experience for me, the song, because one morning, very early in the morning, I was sleeping and I woke up with the song in my head. I dreamed the song and I ran over to my electric piano and played it. And I think I might have made a little recording of it, or I might have just jotted down the names of the chords and the words. So I had like a verse and a chorus that I dreamed. And then I went back to sleep. And then several hours later, I woke up and I remembered, oh, there's that song that I wrote in my dream last night. I wonder if it's any good. And I went over to the electric piano and I looked at the chords and I pieced it together again and sang it to myself. And I was thunderstruck because it was so good. And then I spent a couple weeks playing it for my friends and saying, what is this? What is this song? I had it in a dream. And everybody said, oh, I've never heard it before, but it's really great. And I eventually wrote another verse for it in a bridge, but it really kind of appeared fully formed. And even those chords at the beginning of the song, because I went to the electric piano in my apartment and played the chords, that's the same instrument we used for the record. So I can't even really claim much credit for the arrangement because that was all part of the dream. I later found out that Paul McCartney had the same exact experience with the song Yesterday. And he went around to his friends asking, what is this? Is this something from before? Is this someone else's song? So I'm in good company. But yeah, that song was a gift from the gods. I don't know what that was.
I mean, that's famously Keith Richards, the guitar part to Satisfaction. Did the same thing too.
Seriously?
Yeah, he woke up.
Whoa.
He woke up, had the melody in his head while he was sleeping. Woke up, ripped it on guitar, and then went back to bed. So it's
amazing. I mean, it's funny because I think once you're in that super creative mode where everything's a song and every chance remark that some friend makes turns into a lyric, and you're like a sponge, and it doesn't surprise me in a way that dreams get roped into the process as well. But how lucky to wake up and remember enough to write it down.
Yeah, no joke. There's actually another famous story. It's much funnier on the other side of it. Are you familiar with Bill Callahan? Smog. He used to be called as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he has a song called I'd Ma Clackshaw, and the whole song is about having a dream about a song and scribbling it down and then going back to sleep. But when he wakes up the next day, he can't understand what the hell he wrote down, and it looks like it says I'd Ma Clackshaw, and he's like, what does that mean?
I think that's probably more typical.
Yeah, ends up being one of my favorite songs of his too, but not what we intended.
Oh my God, I'm totally going to look it up.
You have to. It's such a great song. It really is. Bizarre, but great. So I read, though, for this, it's funny that you talk about just wanting to get in the studio and create, because as I read here, you wrote around 60 songs for what would end up being this record. You recorded 20 of them, mixed 16, and used 12.
Yeah, brutal.
So
a brutal weeding out.
What happened to all the other songs? Did any of those end up having a life on the next record or down the line, or are they just fragments lost to the wind?
Well, I did write 60 songs. I played them all for the guys and and probably 40 of them for our producer, Nick Launay. There were definitely, 20 that were just not great, and it was plain that they weren't. But I was kind of in a mode where I wasn't saying that everything I did was great. I just was not going to decide if it was great, and I would just play it for the guys. We'd made a lot of demos, very simple, and I just tried to not decide right away whether something was any good. So I wrote a lot of songs, and a bunch of them, if you were to say 60 songs, you might want to say he wrote 30 really good songs and 30 bad songs, But then there was still all the weeding out, and Nick was really good about almost like hearing what songs would represent us best, like what would rock but be interesting, or Nick thought of us as a smart rock band, basically. So he just wanted things to rock mostly and to be funny or intelligent or, insightful. And those were his, he wanted it to present us in the best light. So he weeded out a bunch of them and we argued a little bit. And then a couple were problems I could never solve. There was one called One True Love. And I had a whole version of the song. And the band, we could never really quite agree how to play it. And it always seemed a little bit flawed. And later, it didn't make the record. And I brought it to a session that I did with Carole King, which was also a kind of unbelievable, surreal moment for me. But I brought One True Love to Carole King, and she wrote a whole new verse melody for it, and kind of basically we threw out a bunch of it and rewrote a whole bunch of other things for it, and it became really, really good. So there were several that had later lives, and there were a bunch that if I heard them now, I'm sure I'd remember them vividly, but I'd also know why we didn't choose them.
Right. But, I'll say this too, 16 were mixed, only 12 were used, which means there are 4 lying around out there somewhere.
Yeah. And it's funny because sometimes I feel like B-sides, or the outtakes, they got taken out for a reason. I go back to the Beatles a lot. I don't know if there's 10 Beatles outtakes, but none of them are that good, in my humble opinion. They were smart. They left out the excess, and only released the great stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like there were a couple outtakes. There was one called Long Way From Home that I really love and that I still can listen to, and it just didn't make the cut. And there were a couple others that I think I was in such a mellow mood with some of my writing. So there were a couple others that if we'd included them on Feeling Strangely Fine, it just would have become like too many ballads, too much mellowness and gentleness. So we had to keep the energy higher rather than letting it be too singer-songwritery.
Which I'm all for. I mean, there's a lot of my favorite records that's just a few tracks too long, when that happens. Yeah. I completely understand.
It does happen. Yeah.
Excuse me. Well, I mean, I'll keep pushing a little bit more on that. Do you think you'll ever put them out? Are you going to ever, think you'll ever send those out into the world? You'll ever feel comfortable enough?
Yeah, some of them. I mean, there's hardly any, I don't think Spotify or even YouTube have caught up with the last of our B-sides, but we put out a lot of singles and B-sides and things. We wanted to be prolific. We didn't want our albums to be too long. That was always a struggle to try to make them shorter. But we always tried to find ways for fans to have the alternate, versions. My favorite outtakes that I hope we can find a way to release eventually are actually the demos that never even got recorded. I think sometimes those have more emotion, and they have more. It's more like it's a glimpse into how we made the music, but also those songs didn't try and fail. They just never got cut. So some of those demos, I hope we get a chance to release those.
I hope so too. Well, you've got all year if you want to make it for a 25th or or whatever. So I can be hopeful on that one. And I know you guys you played a show in December too. You think there's going to be more? Are you going to do the full album show tour or anything like that in the plans?
There's no specific plan to do a full album tour, but we did play in Minneapolis all of Feeling Strangely Fine in December of last year, and it was pretty great. It was pretty mind blowing for us. It was fun to play those songs in that order and not have to think about the other parts of our repertoire. And I put it this way: I certainly am waving the flag internally for us to do some more gigs like that, because it felt special to me. I hope it happens because happily, Jacob and John and I are still really good friends, and we've made music and done various projects together, even over the years when Semisonic hasn't been active. And, you know, both of them have played on my solo records, and Jacob, the drummer, has written a whole bunch of arrangements for me, including one that I did with that I recorded with the Kronos Quartet last year. So Jacob Jacob, obviously, he's working on his second book. He's a very talented guy, and John's an impresario in Minneapolis with two really great bands, and we do gigs together quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, what are you doing next then, too? Are you still writing with? I guess I should say that you are allowed to tell me, like who you're writing with these days, or what's next on the docket for you?
Well, let's see what's next on the docket. I last year I did a lot of I spent a lot of time on releasing my album Recovered, which is a kind of retrospective of things that I wrote for other people, and that was super fun and very time consuming. And this year I'm not working on that anymore, and so I have a lot more time to write again with other artists. Right now there's a bunch of things out. I have a song called We're Going Home that I did with Vance Joy, and that's out as a single right now. I've got a song with Halsey called Alone. I have it's probably like 5 songs of mine right now out in the world, and a whole bunch more coming out on albums. Some of the things I'm working on right now, I can't talk about who they are, but there's a couple of big stars and a couple of brand new people that are really brilliant, and I continue to be very fortunate in my collaborators.
Yeah, what a great way to
It's actually possible to, and you can find super inspired musical geniuses who are kind or at least fun. It's amazing how many of the people I work with are just good eggs, even though they're brilliant.
It's such an interesting way to have a career because, you know, you're behind the scenes a lot these days writing these songs with Halsey and et cetera, et cetera. And so there's, I'm sure, a large amount of people who don't know that that's that version of your life, and Recovered was a nice way to bridge that gap. But to some people, you know, you'll forever be the closing time guy, right?
Yes, and why not? I one of my, Semisonic had 2 worldwide hits, Secret Smile and Closing Time. And they forever changed our lives. And then we had a bunch of other things that got played on the radio, and we toured. We had the opportunity to play in front of, I don't know, tens of thousands of people at one time, many times. And, you know, in the aggregate, who knows how many, you know, tons and tons and tons of people. We had so much fun. We did that. We had that many bites of that apple, you know. And now when I'm working with other artists, like when I did the last Phantogram record with Phantogram and Ricky Reed, I was picturing them being on really big stages, and like I could actually be there in my imagination with them and enjoy it. And like a lot of times when I'm writing with somebody new, I get to enjoy the thought that maybe this thing we're writing is going to bring them to that crazy whirlwind that I had the chance to be part of, you know? And I think I don't need to do Closing Time again and again and again for the rest of my life. I did that, and it's amazing and special, and now I help other people have that same experience, and that's incredible.
What a beautiful sentiment right there.
Yeah.
Very much so. And if we were already edited, this is where we would hear the line, "I hope you last a long, long time."
Oh, I love that.
That's what would be happening right here.
I love that.
Oh. This was so much fun, Dan. Thank you for giving me the time to live out a lot of my teenage geek dreams with the interviews that I was never able to do in my bedroom.
Yeah, we don't get the chance to interview the people we want to when we're 16.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. Right. But yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Well, keep us updated, and can't wait till your next project comes around. And if nothing else, then we'll just do this when the chemistry record comes around, and we get to do it that anniversary.
Which is a lovely thought as well. I'm looking forward to that when the time comes.
All right, man. Have a great day. We'll see you.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Consequence of Sound's YouTube channel for more interviews with your favorite artists, and for good radio, WFPK.org. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.